fans of the Horus Heresy, Lorgar Aurelian, and doing absolutely insane reposes of Primarch models, thank you very much for joining me for a video where I'm going to talk to you and showcase a recent commission build piece that I have done for a client. And this is a Primarch build, and as you probably deduced, we are talking about this chap here, Lorgar Aurelian, the Urizen, Primarch of Legio 17, the Word Bearers. Now, I'm not really going to be talking about the model specifically here, as I do in one of my usual reviews, but I'm actually going to be discussing the extensive repos I did, as you can see on the finished piece here, and the ideas that sat behind this and the work that I did to create it. So that is what we are going to talk about in today's video. So in broad terms, I'm going to give you an overview of the model, show you around it, and then going to talk about the artistic brief, what the client was looking for me to do with this. And then I'll talk about how I actually executed that and some of the tricks and techniques I used to achieve this repositioning. So that's the plan. Let's start with a bit of a look around this miniature. So yes, Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word Bearers. This miniature is manufactured by Forgeworld, and it is part of their Horus Heresy character series set, as I'm sure you will all know, certainly people who regularly follow my channel. This was one of the earliest Primarch models to be released, and unlike most of Primarch models now, who were sculpted by Simon Egan, this was sculpted by Edgar Skowarowski. I think I got the pronunciation right. That's the best I can manage. So if you are listening, Edgar, and I got that wrong, my apologies. So it's a little bit different in that regard. Now, the stock pose is very different to what we see here. And we'll just flick to a quick screenshot to show you what it looks like as designed. And you can see he is stood in a contemplative pose, looking down some steps with his mace at his side. So it's not a combat pose. Now, I really like the stock pose, and I think it suits Lorgar's nature well. However, Lorgar is also a Primarch, and therefore a god of war, and he certainly gets stuck into the fighting in the Horus Heresy series. And what the client was after was a more dynamic positioning. And specifically, what they wanted was a pose that was inspired by the artwork on the front of the Black Library Horus Heresy novel, Betrayer. And that was a novel that was written by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. And yes, as you can see, in this artwork, Lorgar is depicted with left leg raised up and his mace over his shoulder, having just struck an ultramarine out of the way. Quite an inevitable ending for a space marine fighting a Primarch, you might say. And that was what I've aimed to achieve with this repositioning. Now, it's not an exact recreation. There are limits to what I feel that I could achieve with the repose of this model, because there's certain amounts I can do, but the client wasn't after an exact recreation, more a thematic capturing of that pose. And, you know, I do feel that we've had some success here. So yes, let's have a little look around here. So as you can see, the base is unchanged. I've not done anything different there. I cut both of the legs off on this leg, and I cut that off at the hip, which allowed me to reposition it slightly. I also cut the prayer scrolls carefully away from the leg because those run down the side of it. On his other leg, so his left leg, I not only cut it off at the hip, but I also removed the knee armor plate, I separated the lower leg, and I also cut the foot off. So this was reduced 4 parts to allow me to completely repose it. The left arm is largely unchanged, but the right arm is completely reposed, as you can see. And that was to facilitate having his mace raised. Of course, the mace is his signature weapon, Illuminarum, which interestingly was crafted for Lorgar by the Primarch of the Iron Hands Legion, Ferrus Manus. This is an absolutely stunning miniature in itself. The detailing on his armour is absolutely exquisite. And it's supposed to represent the chaos, or the chaotic form, I should say, of Colchizian runes. that he has inscribed across his armour. His sidearm is an Archaeotech pistol. It's a beautiful piece in its own right. He has a large cloak. His left pauldron has got more colchicine runes on it. He's wearing standard Artificer-style Primarch armour, and this was the first time we saw this. As you can see from this backpack, and this was repeated several times in the Primarch range as it progressed, although not all Primarchs wear this type. There are kind of like the Primarchs who have more the Terminator-style armour. And then on his right pauldron, he has a very ornate book icon. So this is the final repose, and I kind of always like to imagine it a bit like this. Lorgar is looking down at someone having struck them. We did have some discussion about cutting off the haft of the luminarum and extending his hold to match the artwork. So he's holding it probably about here, but the client liked it like this and felt that that was unnecessary. It would have looked quite cool, but having the mace extended by another centimetre would have obviously made it a more delicate piece, and the head of the luminarum is already a very, very delicate detail on this model, so to have it extended further would make it more of a damage risk. So perhaps it is a sensible compromise between the two positions. I mean, as I say, I really like Lorgar anyway. I feel that the reposition to match the artwork on Betrayer, I'm really, really proud of this. It took a lot of work, it really did. I will be sorry to send this on to the client. Well, it's going to the painters first, but yes, I'll be sorry to send this one on. Okay, so now let me talk a bit about how I actually approach this. So I think it would be useful if we remove Lorgar from his display base, and we've got a typical sort of arrangement here. There's a number of 3x2mm N52 grade magnets, which allow him to slot into that. So we shall set that to one side, and we'll get a little bit closer to the Primarch himself. This reposing involved two main elements of conversion consideration. The first was his left leg, and instead of a mound, which I could have built, the client asked for a dismembered torso, or a torso of the Space Marine. So this is a Mark III Space Marine, as you can see, Mark III iron armour, an unfortunate ex-wearer. I took the artistic decision to, because I wasn't going to put all the bits and pieces on, or all this head on, so it wasn't space. I thought I'd just have ropey bits of flesh and tissue hanging out of it. And my thinking was that Lorgar had used his considerable psychic powers to basically explode this Space Marine from within. And that seemed like it was quite a nice thing in terms of keeping the base from being too busy, but it also fitted the character of a Primarch. So, of course, we're also imagining Lorgar in his transfigured state, and probably as he was during the Shadow Crusade, where he fought alongside Angron on a number of worlds. So that was the first thing, it was how to do that. So in terms of doing this, I mean, this was quite a delicate piece of cutting work. Firstly, there was actually cutting it, and I'll tell you what, let's remove his cloak at this stage, because that's not glued on for painting purposes yet. That was quite delicate to cut the leg away without damaging the surrounding detail. And to do that, I very simply used, well, the tool was simple. It was a case of using this scalpel, which I've featured in my videos many times, with a brand new blade, so it was razor sharp, very, very sharp, and then cutting around and cutting it free. And yeah, it's just delicate, careful work. A lot of force is needed, but a lot of control as well, and I had to be very careful with the old fingers. Not that I had any slips, because I didn't, but some of the cuts I were making, if I had slipped, I could have easily needed a trip to hospital. It was challenging, that was. I then cut the knee apart, and I cut the foot out as well. One of the funny little things that I'm really proud of is this little cutter detail, which you can see the opposite one of there. And it has this tiny little cable that connects it to the thigh. I cut this away, and I ever so delicately preserved the cutter. And I then repositioned it in line with the knee pad and I think his raised knee. And then I very carefully heat bent the cable so it was reattached approximately in its original intended position. It was a very small thing, that, but I managed to pull it off without A, losing anything, but B, preserving the original feel of the armour. This leg was all pinned back together. This was pinned as well. I put a pin in the knee and a pin in the hip, and then a pin in the ankle. And I used fairly thin wire, and I just basically bent it until I got it right. And once I got it right, glued the pin, I glued this joint, I glued this joint. There wasn't so much to glue on the knee, but what you can see I did is I filled it with green stuff to reconstruct his armour's undergarment, as you can see here, on the original leg. One substantial piece of work, this is going to be quite hard to visualise here. The prayer papers ran down this leg. Most of this detail you can see here on his armour, I hand sculpted that in. And I did it just to, I think really just to try and preserve continuity of the armour rune sculpt features. So that was quite an interesting and creative part of this build. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I feel that you would struggle to say where the original work ended and my interpretation began. So yeah, I was pleased with that as well. This leg was pinned back on, a little bit of repositioning just to get the stance right, a little bit of bending of the ankle joint, although that wasn't cut off. And then that essentially was the stance. Lorgar is quite a lithe and athletic figure. And that was an interesting part of creating this stance. And he's almost got the poise of a fencer in a way. So that was quite a fun part of visualizing this. Now let's talk about his right arm, which is holding a luminarum. In the stock pose, this is kind of held down at his side, and now it's almost rotated, probably through close to 90 degrees. And to do that, I cut some of the material away around the shoulder and then recreated the mounting point, but facing up this way instead of this way. So as I say, it's about a 90-degree rotation on that. This little armor plate here was initially quite a challenge. What I ended up doing was I ended up cutting behind it and then cutting it free of his torso. Once I got the arm ready, as you can see, the aluminarum's not stuck on yet. Once I got the arm position right, I then heated this up, put the arm in position and bent the plate. And I did that because that was the only way I could really visualize that particular part of armor working, as if it's a semi-rigid plate, because otherwise I just couldn't quite visualize how the articulation of it worked. Anyway, that's my interpretation. I was really pleased with how it came out, and it completely preserved the original detail. So this arm was pinned in position. I then heated up this pauldron and pushed it to fit, and you can see how it's developed a slight bend there. I'm just going to remove a luminarum, because that's only tacked on. Again, that's at the request of the person who's going to paint this. And that was just to get the fit on the armor plate. Again, I'm imagining armor material these pauldrons are made from is semi-flexible. I imagine all Space Marine armor plates are semi-flexible. Otherwise, I just don't think they could move. So I've used that personal interpretation of the dynamics of their armour to good effect in this reposing of Lorgar. And then the final thing was just to reposition his head. And much like the cover art from Betrayer, he's staring down. And I think in this respect, the stock face suits this perfectly, because he does have a certain, I don't know, sort of sneering look, as if he's looking down and sneering at the Ultramarine who he'd just whacked. So yes, that worked very nice, and I was really pleased how that came out. The amount of work involved in this relative to this was considerably less, although it's still challenging doing this plate in particular, but the main joint bit on that wasn't so hard, so I was really pleased with how that came out. This leg took a lot of work. That was a real challenge doing that. I think then that is more or less the repose described. His pistol seemed to sit in quite a natural place there. You can see how the belt strap is connected quite nicely to his belt, so I was pleased with that. Yeah. And I just reconstruct the wrist joint with a little bit of green stuff, and then set the pin up ready for sticking together. Illuminarum is an incredible piece of sculpting. I'm very impressed by that. Wonderful. I think that's probably most of the key points. You can't quite see it, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to get focus, but there is an area in there of his armour where I had to completely reconstruct part of the surface because of where this knee pad had been. Here, I was able to rescribe it, but on this side I had to reconstruct it. So that was quite delicate green stuff work. It's difficult to see. Again, that was another nice little bit of work to tie it all back together once the conversion had been done. Because having chopped this model up and then put it back together, some of the rich detail of his armour plates was lost. And that's a key part of this miniature. So recreating that either through resculpting the resin surface or recreating a new surface using green stuff was, I think, absolutely essential for this. But yes, so overall, a stunning model and a conversion that I was really very proud of. Oh, one final point, one little thing I did on this arm, I repositioned it slightly, just using the existing joint. And then using heat manipulation, I closed up the fingers on the hand. So instead of being open like this, it's more clenched like a fist. I suppose ideally it might have been a fully clenched fist, but didn't feel I could bend the fingers any tighter than they are without risking damaging, snapping them. Because there's only so far you can bend resin using heat. So I took that as far as I felt was safe. A reposed Lorgar Aurelian inspired by the book cover of Betrayer. So let's put him back together now. Did I do anything with the his cloak? I think I probably did some heat bending around that, probably to make it look a bit more dynamic, as if it's flapping in the opposite direction to the motion of the mace swing. So you've got the mace going that way, the cloak going that way. So let's just pop him back together. The final thing was to magnetize the detachable part of the base. And as is often the case with these character series models, with a bit of heat bending and test fitting, the result was good. So there you have it, a commission repose of Primarch Lorgar Aurelian model by Edgar Skoromoski. I hope you found this an interesting overview of what I believe is probably quite a unique conversion. I hope you found it an interesting insight into the creative process that went into making this. As always, please do share your thoughts and observations in the comment section. I will be very interested to read those. But other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.